share your screen.
Hi. The photos from a few years back.
Sorry, that.
Your photos quite outdated.
Ah. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of going in front of the camera, so.
People always do that. But these photos from like 30 years ago. Don't worry, my union's the same. I was like in my early 20s.
We also very much.
That's the same with conductors and ballerinas, you know, they have the photo in the program and the guys are like,
Okay, guys, I think we'll commence. So, my name's David Week. I'm chairing today. This is a presentation about Bauer Studio, which designs and constructs with Indigenous communities. And the seminar will outline the work of Bauer Studio, which has won many awards and has worked with Indigenous partners to design and build community infrastructure projects. David, O'Brien, who's presenting, is an associate professor here at UniMel. He's worked on community development and research with Indigenous communities in Australia, PNG, Indonesia, and Thailand. Over to you, David.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go to the share screen, hopefully, and smoothly. So thanks for the opportunity to have a chat with you today. I grew up in Melbourne, in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, and that there is the car that my dad had, although this was a, this one didn't have that sexy little bit of white wheel across the back, but I grew up in the middle of suburbia, and in the photograph on the right, which I discovered the other day, is Shopping Town, which is in Doncaster, and that was built in 1969, and my mum loved that place. So we'd get dragged off after school there all the time, and hence I don't like shopping ever since. I was burnt out from that, but that's my background where I came from. So white Aussie, white bread type bloke. I did architecture here. Loved the course, really enjoyed the course, went out into the real world after that, got the job where you work for corporate or for rich people, didn't really enjoy that particularly much, and started doing a bit of teaching at uni, which I really enjoyed. Around this time, I chucked one of the architecture jobs I had and started to go traveling. And at this stage, I first went into Laos when it was shut back at that time. But coming back through Thailand, I was fascinated by some similarities and some differences in the way that the world worked. And this is advertising material for the new suburbs they were building at the time. And, you know, but it's all sexed up and everything like that. The water's blue. And then they had like the shots of the suburbs as well. This is supposed to be the river here, you know, there's the freeway, all of those sort of ideas of modernity that I'd sort of grown up with, and I love the parallels but also the differences in the world. I got involved with an NGO in the northeast of Thailand, who first got its funding with the HIV prevention. So it was the passing out condoms, all of the education, those sorts of things. That was quite successful at that, and we're getting additional funding for other projects as well, which was great to see. When I went to work with them, they put me up in a professor's house, which was like a white concrete block row house type thing. It was horribly uncomfortable to live in. No, it wasn't air conditioned or anything like that, which I was happy about, but it was white tile, really poor ventilation, and I'd lie and sweat out the nights. There was this bamboo hut on the side of the compound they had, and I was like, can I have a crack at that? You know, I want to see what, you know, what that kind of lifestyle is like. And they were like, oh, we're worried about you or whatever. And then in the end, they, you know, relented. So I stayed there for 3 months until the wet season really kicked in. And I can understand, made me understand why people would aspire beyond that. So it was a really, really important lesson for me to work out that, you know, even though in my mind, it had that ideas, romantic type of idea, even though it was cooler and everything like that, I started to see the disadvantages of that gecko crap on the bed all the time, getting rained on, that kind of stuff wasn't so great. And at the same time, I was looking at a village quite closely, and Kim was my PhD supervisor through this. Thank you, Kim. Taught me a lot. And I was looking at the changes that were occurring in the village, and it was a lot of that was based on technology, but it was also people aspiring to different types of living. Back at uni here, I was like interested in testing out some of the lessons I'd learned during that program. And so with the permission of the NGO and the local village, and with a couple of universities in Thailand, we had this collaboration where we were looking at building traditional typologies in a salar here with more modern materials. And it was a great experience. The students loved it. We loved it. The food was fantastic. It was so much fun. It was like one of the best traveling, studio experiences you could ever imagine. But the reality was that they don't need us over there. You know, we weren't having the impact that I thought that, that we should, in the privileged position we have, that we should be able to offer. And before I'd actually embarked on that project, I had been doing some reading about the problems that were, or the difficulties faced in Australia with Indigenous people. And I to be honest, I wussed out. I didn't take on that project. All the readings I'd done on it were all difficult. It was a whole lot of bad news stories. It was really, really problematic. So the project in Thailand, in some ways, was it was lovely to do and all of that kind of stuff, but it wasn't grappling with the really, really tough issues. So when we'd done this project, the way that it was sort of structured and students working on site with community, that was all really, really solid. It's just that I thought that we could make a big impact. So since then, I have put together, as David was talking about, this idea of the Bauer Studio. So it's taking students to go and work in communities. So the first one we did in the picture up there is obviously in Thailand, out in the rural areas, and I do like the rural areas. I feel, I don't know, it's just part of the way that my interest in the world. I like going to the end of the train line. I like catching the bus a bit further than like that, and then walking beyond that. I like going to the difficult remote areas, and you can see in the places that we've worked, most of them are in Nowheresville. And they're the different places that we've worked in up to date. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to take you, the image on the left is like the different projects we've done. The bottom right one is the one that we did, the first Indigenous one we did in 2008, right up to the top left, which is the one that we finished in first semester this year. So I'm going to take you through a couple of different projects. I'm going to start off with the good news stories, where we've got it right. And then I'm going to finish off with where we're getting things, or where the difficulties. So I was originally thinking good and bad, and it's way more complicated than that. But there's some of the things lessons that we've learned that, or are still learning. So I'll finish off with that as well. One of the good news stories is this project that we did in Whakathuni in 2011. So it's the top map shows you it's out in the Pilbara. It's an area that Rio Tinto was making mega bucks out of selling iron ore. So they've got all the train lines from there that go up to Port Hedland. They're shipping out billions of dollars, and some of it trickles down into the communities. So there's a couple of homeland communities out of Tom Price, and the first one that we worked at in 2011 was Whakathuni. We were asked to do an early learning centre, so 0 to 5. So all of the studies show that 0 to 5 is incredibly important. It's like reading to kids. It's all of that, all of that kind of stuff, keeping them fed. That stuff is really, really important. So the Faculty of Education put together the education program that was run in this area, and we were asked if we would put together the structure for it. So this is the community. It's that many houses, and that red circle is the area that we went to build in. As a side issue, above that red circle on the top, directly above it up the back, there was a building that they had sort of earmarked for this education program, and we went there, and the building was an absolute dud, but it was sitting on concrete foundations that were just perfect for us. And I was like, let's just get the whole top knocked off, and we will rebuild it on the concrete foundations. Interesting, we've done all of the consultation with everyone. Everyone was really, really happy with this idea. Just as before we caught the flight back, one of the people came up and said, you can't do that. I'm refusing to, allow you to do that, because there isn't enough respect for buildings that were built in the initial stage of the homeland. We want to keep this as like a monument. There are some handprints of kids that have died on the wall there. You cannot demolish it. So had to, come back like a couple of weeks later, do all of the consultations again. But at the time, I was just like, you've got to be kidding me. Like after everything we've done, this last minute, you're pulling the rug under us. And it annoyed the hell out of me at the time, but I'm really, really glad it happened now. There's, the benefit of hindsight. It is important that actually happened. So we had a group of 16 students and some local guys as well. And we got, because it's really, really remote, we got shipping containers sent. One actually came here from Melbourne and went all the way from Melbourne with a whole lot of gear in it. And then a lot of other stuff came in shipping containers from Perth and was trucked up there. There is pretty much no local materials you can use. Anything that's built is imported in. I'm aware of the carbon footprint of all of this kind of stuff, but if there was an easier way to do it, we would. So this one had 4 shipping containers, and the thing got put together in, apart from we had to do all the concreting again, aside from that, the rest of it all got done in 11 days. So it was a massive, massive effort to get it done in that amount of time. So the program opened up. So it was the Goomela 0 to 5 centre, and big roof and shade and everything like that. You're always nervous about whether these programs actually are funded into the ongoing funded and actually work out. And we went back a few years ago. So there's a video down the bottom left of it when we went back, and it's going great guns. Yep, there's still got a whole heap of kids going there all the time. The buildings are all robust enough and are coping with, some pretty poor treatment at times or whatever. What was happening, and it was a fluke that we were there at the time, is that they were repainting the outside of it. And as you can see from what is coming up, they did a great job of it. So that was a project that I look back on and go, we got it right. That worked really, really well. Don't worry, there's some stories that will counteract that coming on. Around this, actually starting a few years earlier than that, we got involved in we got invited to be involved in a project looking at health hardware in Papua New Guinea. So if you exclude the first project of 2010, the ones from 2012 onwards are in coastal communities, and they are getting, even back then, they're getting slammed by climate change. So they are losing massive amounts of their beach with storm surges and things like that. Areas where were treed out there are no longer treed. They're under, they're under the beach, underwater and under the sand. And people's, in terms of like toileting or whatever, people had pit toilets. Problem with the pit toilets when you get storm surges is poo goes everywhere through communities and people die from it. So we were asked to, what can you do about being able to contain the poo when the storm surges came? We have built like various like composting toilets so that the poo is collected in plastic tubs above the flood level and can compost away. And in the Sawanam one, that project there, we did a neonatal clinic as well. So the women otherwise had, they were giving birth in, it didn't fit a whole lot of cultural reasons. There was a whole lot of issues around that. So we did a neonatal centre, but we've also done other composting, and we've come back to the communities and repaired, because the climate's pretty harsh over there. So the buildings that we do don't last, massive amounts of time. The reason why I've got this up as being one of the more successful projects is the local people, and I'm not saying blokes, it's both genders, are super keen to learn how to use the tools and super keen to learn how to build, not just for building in their communities, but for helping them get jobs as well, like at the ports and things like that. So we have been able to put, first we would use up all the materials that we had. Now after a while, I would double order the materials and leave the materials, and the community would finish off projects, their own projects, without our involvement at all. So it's great. It's fantastic to be able to start a project and have the local people invested enough and skilled enough to be able to continue it once you leave. And the last project that we did, the one in Sear, the community went on after we left, or we got funding, and we didn't even take any students. We just got the funding, sent it over there, and they built classrooms and another toilet out of it. So that's one of the good news stories. This is what on the left is one of the composting toilets. The top right is the neonatal centre. So it's a different type of construction and process than what they're used to, but that they say it is fantastically modern, get to use new tools and all of that kind of stuff, which is great for them. It's the students building it, and it's amazing what you can get done. I think for these we were only on site for about 9 days or so, so you can really clock out quite a bit of stuff in that time. This next project is the one that we're probably most well known for, and this is the walk-off pavilions that we did in Kelkaringi. So if you look at the top map there, you've got, I don't know how well people know their geography for the Northern Territory. Darwin is just underneath the Tiwi Islands there. So to get here, you drive for half a day to get to Catherine, and then it's another day's drive to get into Kelkaringi. So it's an investment every time you go there. But I've still been there 30 times or so. So it's a lot of kilometres under the belt. We got invited out there in 2014. That was the first time I went, and then we got flown out there on a light plane, which was just like had a lawnmower engine on the front of it. It was and the inside of it was as big as a Volkswagen Beetle. So that was a bit of an eye-opener, that journey out there. We were asked to build 3 pavilions that marked the walk-off track. This slide here just as I found out ages later, this isn't the first time that Melbourne University has been involved in this community. So back in, the community is famous because in 1966, they rebelled against the British Lord Vestey, who had stolen all the land in that area, and the cattle had just completely wrecked the environment. And they rebelled after a whole lot of mistreatment and sexual abuse of the women after a really, really long period of time. They went on strike for 9 years, and then they got access to some of their land after that. But during the strike process, Melbourne University collected money and for a water tank and for pump and things like that, and a Melbourne University student drove the pump and the tank out to the community, and that was the first connection between Melbourne University and the strikers. That was 1968. And I found out randomly from talking to Kathy Oak one time, or before a Zoom meeting started, her parents went out there in 1970 and they hitchhiked to Darwin, got a Land Rover, secondhand, drove it down to the community, and they wrote a report about what the community wanted. One of the things that the community wanted was some help working out how to deal with masonry blocks. They'd been donated a concrete block making machine. They made a whole lot of concrete blocks. They just didn't know what to do with them. They had no experience with that before. And so they contacted architecture faculty here. And Stan Barker, who's the white guy on the left slide, was a lecturer. He'd just got his pilot's license, and he got 4 students, and they flew up to Kelkaringi in a light plane, and they started to work. They'd done a crash course in laying blocks before they went, and they started building this first masonry permanent structure up there. Now, I had no idea about this story until about 4 years or so ago, after I'd been working at the community for quite a while. The structure, unfortunately, is not. I'm not able to find out where it is anymore. They possibly weren't great at laying bricks, or they didn't have enough cement in the bricks, and the whole building sort of melted away, or whatever. So in 1975, Gough Whitlam went up there when he was Prime Minister. You've probably all seen this photo before, with that pouring the sand into Vincent Lingiari's hand. And then the community started to have some sort of independence. There's a fantastic book that talks about the history of what happened from the strike time right through to probably about 10 years or so ago. And part of the problem, and which continues to this day, is you've got the traditional lands of Dagaragu, which is where the most militant families that really fought for their land. And the 7 kilometres away is the welfare settlement. That's Kalkaringi, and of course all the money goes into Kalkaringi, and Dagaragu is always left behind in the funding rounds. So there's sort of a bit of animosity between the two communities. In some ways, in other ways not, but you have to tread very carefully and understand the history of that, and be very respectful for the people that are out, 7 kilometres away with their ambitions. On the right-hand side was a photograph that I took when I was there in 2014, and this was the old people taking us out on country and talking about what their ambitions were for the community, and a lot of that is around more recognition of the role that they played in the land rights movement. They want some respect for that. And so it was great being taken out. It's a very gendered society, so the conversations that I pretty much had were with the males. But unfortunately, quite a few people that I was out with that day have since passed on. So I'm really, really aware of the fact that a lot of this knowledge, a lot of this history is disappearing before my eyes. And I look at the new generations and I'm a bit concerned about what will actually happen. These guys were incredibly passionate about the space, the lands where that cattle station was, where they were treated badly. I thought that they would want to have nothing to do with it. But they took us out, told us stories about all of these different objects out and the significance of them. And this was part of the impetus of how we actually worked with our design. So I'm not going to go into the design process that we went through at the moment, but we made various models, and we had a whole bunch of different conversations, and then the 3 pavilions came about. So this is the one at Janani. So it was partway along. When the strike happened, they walked from the cattle station, the Wave Hill cattle station, 25 kilometres to Dagaragu, and we were asked to put 3 pavilions along that journey to essentially mark the journey, which was a lot of fun, a lot of hard work. When I was there just recently, this is one of the areas that got really, really badly flooded out recently. A whole lot of houses were destroyed. I've got a research project going up to do, which I'm super excited about, because I'm going to start in a couple of weeks' time, going up there, getting a whole lot of the people's stories about what's the impact of the new housing that's been put in, because a lot of it looks really, really dodgy. So it should be a really, really interesting story. But when I was there last time, that area is all super green. You can't see, there's no dirt or anything there. It's just all super green grass, which is an amazing transformation in the landscape after the rains. All bolt together as much as we could. In 2014, this is a video that still from a video that I made, because people were telling me these stories and going, they were really keen for this to be shared. They really want their story out there. And this is Helma, and she was talking to camera and talking about the fact that, okay, we want you to do this project now, the 50th anniversary after the walk-off, but we also want a project for the 50th anniversary of the handbag. So that's in 2025. So they want a heritage centre that visitors can come in and somewhere where they can actually store all of these stories, because they're really concerned about the fact that a lot of the stories are dying as the people die as well. And so it's daunting to do a project like this without doing a hell of a lot of research. You know, a gnome has written about the fact of how many times people get this wrong because they haven't done the proper research on this project. And how do you do the research for this sort of thing in a project that's, you know, was like 9 years away or so? And the way that we've addressed that is we've been doing a whole lot of like what I call entree projects along the way. So since the 2016 project, we did another project at the Arts Centre in 2018. We did one in even my visions are hard, 2019. Then the 2021, because of COVID, we had to do that online, but it's amazing how much effort that the community put in through Zoom, because we're all new at that. The amount of time they put into supporting the students through their design, and that I'm forever grateful for them, because otherwise I was in a deep hole. And then a project in 2021 at the community centre, and then the one that we've just finished now, again at the Arts Centre, which we're doing this year and next year. So these projects that we're doing along the way is like building the relationship, building the capacity, testing a whole lot of different construction systems and materials, working out what the community, how they use it, what their ideas are about it. Then that gives us a much clearer idea about what this this project should be to, you know, like the heritage centre type idea. They're not going to get it, unfortunately, by 2025. As soon as Morrison won the election a couple of years ago, I realised we were not going to get this project off the ground because this is a Labor and union community. They're not going to get funding, and that made it really, really difficult. So we're in conversations now with the ALP governments, like in the territory and federally, and they're way more supportive, but I think we're just running out of time to get what the community wants by 2025. We've got like a plan B going, but we're not going to, unfortunately, get, I think, what they want in that time. Again, you know, it might be a stage 1, stage 2 thing, or we'll see. Okay, now we get into where things get a bit sort of more difficult. They were my good news stories. Blairey Springs was a project that we did after that early learning centre in the Pilbara. So this was the project the year after. It's a community that's about 60 kilometres away. The other ones seem to go together well. All of that kind of stuff worked out. The first difficulty we had was the prime place to locate it in the community wasn't available because we just couldn't dig through the rock. So we had to move it a bit further out. And as soon as you move a building which really belongs in this location, as soon as you move it 200 metres across there, that can make a really big difference about how it works and fits into a community. So that was a bit of a bummer too. At the same time, we were looking at and the organisation that was funding for this, what they really want is we need houses. And so we were interested in the consultation process around getting the houses working. And so we came up with the catalogue on the left is modelled on the IKEA catalogue. So we went through an IKEA catalogue and looked at the aspirational images. We look at, like, people want to know how much things cost. They want to know how things are put together. We put together a catalogue that would record this and all the different add-ons. So our idea was that people, the capacity of the community or the Indigenous organisation to be able to build houses is really, really low. So we thought you get the houses trucked in, prefabbed houses trucked in, plopped on the ground, and that's your core sort of thing, and it works and it's robust and everything. And then you add on, you have the add-ons to the houses. And they are things like outdoor living areas, outdoor kitchens, carports, all of the things that in our conversations with people, they wanted added on. So the catalogue essentially has a whole lot of different options that you can add on, turning it from like a house into a home. On the right, we try to also with the kids, getting the kids involved in the conversation as well. We put together this like comic book, although it wasn't really funny, but like essentially talking about how the process went. We thought it sort of aimed for kids, but it could also be helpful for adults as well to see what our process was. And so inside, it's got like instructions, how long things take to build, you know, how much it costs, all of those sorts of things that sort of gave enough information for people to be able to choose what it is that they wanted for their houses. Yep, carports always a popular one. What tools do you need? All of that kind of stuff. So in some ways, that catalogue was a pain in the butt in some ways, because there was this one project in it that everyone wanted. And it wasn't just in that community, but other communities. And we've ended up building it. And some of these communities that's built twice in, I felt like we've turned in there for a machine, just pumping out the same thing over and over again. Although they're all tailored to the particular site and all of that kind of, they're all a little bit different. The main structure was pretty much the same. And I got tired of building it. It seemed like a wasted opportunity in some ways. The idea of what that we had before was that we would start off would take 80% of the responsibility. Then the next time we went back to the community, we would take 50%. And it got to the point that we wouldn't have to do it at all. The model of what happened in PNG doesn't work in Indigenous Australia. It's as unfortunate as that. I've got to admit that PNG has a lot more capacity for self-motivation, all of that kind of stuff, which we're not seeing in the Indigenous communities in Australia. That's sad in a lot of ways. Means that it's much harder for us to make ourselves irrelevant from a project, which is the ideal outcome for these sorts of projects.
Is that the ideal? That one?
Yeah, I think that is. Yeah. Where you make yourself, obsolete. Yeah. Now, this is one of the more recent projects that we've done, which the consultation began. The community is Kimberley. It's on the Murray River. It's upstream from Echuca. This is an area that I said I never wanted to work in. Really, I'd heard a whole lot of. Again, I've heard bad news stories. Here I am admitting that I run away from the bad news stories. Again, I wasn't super keen on this project. What tipped the scales was that we'd done a couple of projects. Melbourne University has a school called ASH, so it's the Academy of Sports, Health and Education in Shepparton. Did anyone know that they have this? No one knows that Melbourne University puts millions of dollars into this school. It's all branded Melbourne Uni up there. It's on Melbourne Uni land and everything. And they essentially are teaching VCAL students there. It's entirely Indigenous run and led and everything up there. And I got taken up there on someone from each of the faculties got taken up there about 6-7 years or so ago and asked, how can you, what connections can you offer? And you know how you sit in meetings sometimes and people just yak and you go, this is going to go nowhere. And that really pissed me off. I thought, I'm damn determined to do this now. I don't want this to be, a wasted exercise. So we had a couple of ASH students as a pilot join us on a project that we were doing at Dookie College one time and went really well. The ASH kids were 17 years old. I had students that were in their 20s. I was a bit nervous about whether the ASH kids would feel overwhelmed by the age difference or whatever. And they said, it's great. We like working with your students. We love what we're learning. We like, the maturity of your students. So that was great. So when we started doing this project I have mislabeled that down on the bottom right, sorry. When we started doing that project at Kimberley, I was like, let's get the ASH people involved again. It didn't work. I think that the organisation itself up there, I think, is underfunded. And I think that, unfortunately, it's not super set up for for, there's a review of ASH yesterday going on at the moment. I was interviewed about this yesterday. I was really nervous about being critical of a project up there, but it's problematic. It's not just funding. I think that the students are, they're not pushed enough. I think the students are keen, but I think the teaching staff are struggling to, they don't have education backgrounds, and yeah, it's a bit messy and a bit problematic. And it's not, and I'm not just saying it's ASH that's making this difficult, but the project up there, there was a whole lot of forest thinnings of red gum logs. We were asked by the community, what can you do with them? We need a space where we can practice our culture on site. And so they were like, you've got to use the timber. And so we made a whole bunch of models and did a bunch of visits up there. We made models at different scales to see how we could make, logs in the round like that are difficult to use and risky too, about splitting and all sorts of stuff like that. So we had to make sure we designed it in a way that was robust enough as well. We also had to make sure that the community were on board as well. So we did a whole lot of our test work outside the health centre in the community. So we put up a whole lot of practice projects along there, and we put up other information in the community to make sure that the community was on board. We've had, all up now, we've had about 120 students involved in this project at different times, at different scales as well. So the concrete work was done by students that could get it done in just a few days, but all of the main structure was done by a group that did, I think they did 5 visits up there over time to get the thing built. There's some interesting, some of the stories that were told by elders, we've got that, incorporated that into the concrete as well, the textures in the concrete. So we were reflecting back and abstracting, but reflecting back the stories that have been told to us by the people in the community.
David, how much farther do you have to go? Because we like to leave time at the end.
Yep, sure. How much?
I don't know, 5 minutes?
Yep, okay,
Yep.
That's great. The problems is that there was one person in the community that made our life hell. All the other community members were not fans of hers, but she still had enough power to make our lives really, really difficult as well. So that was a problem. We had to move the building again. Second time we've had to move a building with the same sort of impact as last time. And on the right-hand side there is our provost. Nicola Phillips. Yep. The Chancellery loved it as a project and sort of had their eyes shut about all of the things that were problematic with the project as well. The other problem is that Uncle Cole, who's on the right there, when the old people get sick or aren't well, or he got his house flooded out when they had the floods on the Murray recently, they've got really, really complicated lives. And so sometimes they're just not available when it'd be great if they were. So there's sort of other problems you deal with. Mapping how these projects work is really, really difficult. And I've been asked at different times. So this was in 2011, I was asked to map how these projects work. And you try putting these things together and it's really, really difficult to do because there's so many moving parts and it's so complicated. When I was working with James Thompson from Belt here, he was like, he was really keen on working out how to diagram. He does both of these diagrams, and I go, but it's still not right. It still doesn't capture the complexity of these projects. This is where it starts to make more sense to me. This is a bit of jewelry that my partner had, and the complexity in this and the fact that there is no start and end, all of this kind of stuff makes much, much more sense to me on how to think about these projects. It's not hierarchical, it's not a start and a finish to a degree, and it's not design build because the students aren't designing and then building what they've designed because of the time pressures we have. The students come into our project in some ways having done some research at uni and then come in as our labourers, and then they do their designs after they've spent time in the community as well. So it flips that design build model because it doesn't work in the way that we've other faculty or other institutions around the world do it or whatever. And these images here. So the one left, when I start looking into this again, this image on the left made sense to me in terms of a diagram of how it works. But the one that this on the right is a detail from a painting that was given to me by one of the community members up at Kelparingi. And that seems to make you know, I lie on the couch and I look at it and I start thinking about the fact that, yes, it's not linear, but how rhizomatic is it? Is there still like pathways through this that link from one area to another? Is there, you know, it's because that's underwater, that's like plant type things happening. It's still got to be connected at some way. There's still a connection in it. So how rhizomatic is it? How much is it anchored? And how much of it becomes fluid? Yep. I'll finish there.
Thanks, David. And so we're opening the floor and online to the online floor as well to questions. And Merrick, you'll be watching the online.
Yeah, I'll be watching the chat.
I'll start. David, that was great. Thanks a lot. And I really like the story that you started with. I wanted to pick up the rhizome though, comment, because you know the various projects you've been working on, you kind of go in and felt in terms of the presentation, but I'm sure in reality it's not this at all. Very episodic. You go in, you come out, then another project go in, you come out. How do you navigate the rhizome of relationships? Like what kind of work is necessary to understand power relationships, kinship relationships, community relationships, and then your position within that in that time? And then when you extract, what happens to the rhizome?
That I think you've picked up on the fact that what I do enjoy is the returning to the same community multiple times. When the project first started, it was a bit more piecemeal, you know, because you're establishing yourself, you've got to try and work out how the funding works over time, whatever. So once you've gone back to places multiple times, you can start to understand the complexities. Some of the tensions that happen between the Dagaragu community and the 7 kilometres away, the Kelparingi, and they've got an amazing history and a complicated history there. I'm sort of aware that if you jump in and you put all your, if you're seen as one community and not the other community, then you start becoming part of the problem that they've actually got going on. So being able to have that sort of flexibility and to be able to move between the different actors without having, you know, put all your eggs in the one basket in the one you know, one group of community members or a single community member, that's important. The problems in some ways when you're working at the, for example, the Kumaragunja one, the one on the Murray River, is that it's hard to navigate around that community because there are some really strong leaders, but there's other people in the community that aren't very empowered at all, and for a whole bunch of various reasons. It's a difficult question because it's a difficult area. It's difficult to be sure about how to answer it as well.
I have a question, which I guess is also endlessly complex. I'm curious about the funding of the projects.
Yes.
So you have this semester that you do with students at UniMel. How much is covered by the university? How much is from external funding?
The
How does it work?
university covers my costs and perhaps another staff member's cost. But in terms of everything else, until this year, the students pay all their own costs.
Where do you get the materials from? Building materials and things like that? Do you get sponsorships?
That comes from research, you know, grants. So every project here has had a chunk of time beforehand where you've actually got to pull the money together for the project.
Okay, maybe
So
we can chat more.
The ones in the
about
Northern
that.
Territory came from Aboriginal Benefits Account grants, and I ended up doing a whole lot of writing the grant, but I can't put Melbourne University as the lead on it because the money always has to go through the Aboriginal organisation.
Okay, so if you already have those contacts in the communities, it makes it easier because you can work with them to create the application to the grant.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a chunky lead time before each of these projects in order to get all of that in place. On the other hand, though, the Kumaragunja project hasn't been funded the money for that has come from other sources that we've got over the years. So, you know, one time we won a grant, we won an award and it was like 10 grand. So that goes, you know, I put that in the bank until I need it for a project that's going to be unfunded. So money in the Northern Territory projects is way easier than, you know, the one that's on the Murray River. And they're really disempowered communities in terms of being able to access funds.
Eric, by the way, do we have people coming in after this, or are we free?
Don't believe so, but
All right,
people can still talk, so someone might.
Kim, I think that
Yeah, look, thanks, David. Could you speculate on why you think that the Papua New Guinea, it's easier to build capacity in Papua New Guinea than in Australia?
Yeah, sit down money. It's what sit down money. So when Gough Whitlam came in, the idea of that was equal pay. You know, the people that were working on the cattle stations up until then were getting paid stuff all. They were getting, you know, crappy cuts of meat and tobacco and tea and sugar, right? That was what they were getting paid, pretty much no wages. So when Gough came in, it was like, okay, we have to make sure that all of the people get paid equally, you know, sensible argument to make. The problem was that meant that the cattle stations then went, well, if I'm going to pay someone, I'm going to reduce my Indigenous labour force. And they also at that stage were getting, you know, better access to technology. So they would round up cows instead of on a horse, on a motorcycle. So it meant that there was a lot less employment opportunities for people in communities, but they also were able to access welfare. So that's a sit down money idea. So that meant that people didn't work as much as they used to. So skills were not getting passed on. You still got fed whether you worked or not. In PNG, that doesn't happen. There is no sit down money. So if you don't work, you starve. So people are, you know, it's part of their culture, I think. It's not necessarily a nice answer, is it?
It's the first thing I thought, but I was afraid to say it.
I think the flip side of that is that
Same in Africa.
because it's like that in PNG, the people in PNG have always built, I mean, 70 or 80% of them have built their own houses continuously, even now. So this, if you look at what the other way could have been or might have been, is that in that country, because perhaps it was never stopped, but it really already existed. So you coming and building another building in a building that already has self-built buildings is very different from you building a building that has government buildings.
Yeah, what we tried to do was to do an incremental thing where you could buy the first kit for quite a cheap amount, but it only set you up with a frame within which to complete it as you get, you know, funding. And I think that is also a good solution sometimes where people have to invest and they're proud of what they produce themselves. Yeah.
That was the idea of like the Homes Plus catalogue, where you do get that core house and then people add on, you know, working on people's, like, you know, aspirational.
But we were even like the first instance, you just finish it in sheet metal like a shack, but it's upgradable to brickwork over time, you know, that sort of thing. Yeah.
They had a Northern Territory project called Room to Breathe, where they got slammed in the press because they built corrugated iron shacky type things, and they weren't proper houses. So there's a real risk for you know, putting something up that isn't a traditional. Yeah, well, the teacher's house idea. So where it does look complete.
No, but I think that's the thing. We have to start rethinking how we tackle this housing
There's
issue.
a difference too, I think, in say settlements in where you've been studying, where getting materials means just walking, you know, a couple of kilometers.
In the
Whereas you were
northern
describing, there are no materials, so it's a matter of like complicated logistics and going to town. You know,
Yeah.
so that's another factor.
Yeah, I was wondering,
Sorry, go ahead.
also on that note about, so I saw the modwood fence. So that's like plastic, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
So-
Sawdust glued together sawdust.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, does disposal become an issue up there as well? Like, eventually, so thinking about the life cycle of the materials.
If you saw what gets chucked out in the dumps and everything out there, like the dumps are just full of stuff that's like, had its short life and it's just trashed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the way it is. The mod wood we used, because if we used real timber, I mean, sometimes in some places you've got your termite problem, so mod wood is not going to get termited, and also you can't pull it up to put it in the fire.
Yeah.
So you can't. It reduces the risk if your building ended up,
As far
as
Forward, yeah.
So everything has to be robust and thought about in terms of its longevity, and model was the answer.
Yeah, I was interested in that.
No, the bigger issues than life cycle costs of
Yeah.
the environment on these
Yeah.
projects.
Yeah.
The modwood's actually done really, really well. It will outlast timber, I reckon.
Yeah.
Without the risks.
Yeah, I can see
That's what
without
she's worried
last it,
about.
but then it's just that it doesn't break down into the environment, then it just becomes, I don't know, that's all.
No.
Eric Keys has a question for you.
Look, great presentation. I found it very engaging. Thank you. Well, two things to say is your discomfort in engaging with local community is something I find. I'm sort of wondering what I should actually be doing about it. I'm entirely sure you'll help in that way. So, because you've reinforced some of the difficulties I think you face in engaging with those communities. So that's by way of comment. And so the question then is, how do you make where do the initial connections between these communities? Because it seems to be a sort of fairly random mapping in terms of those connections. So there must be some fairly random processes going on making those connections.
We're only doing projects where we get asked to come. So the first project that I did up at Gordorka in 2008, obviously we had no reputation or anything like that. That came from a cold call, really. So I called up one of the local organisations up there, and Aboriginal organisation, and I said, I've worked in Thailand for ages. I'm really interested. I'm interested to see how some of the lessons I've learned might be applicable or might not. I was very, very honest about it, and I went up there with a group of students, and one of the community leaders and the business manager for the community came up to me and said, would you come up with another group of students and fix one of the houses here? And I was like, sure, yeah, we'll give that a crack. And ever since then, we've been asked to go to the different places so people find out what we do or whatever, and contact and say, are you interested? So,
and is that snowballing and accelerating beyond your capacity, perhaps?
Yeah. And it's incredibly hard to upscale this. I mean, when Chancellery went to the Kumro Gunja project, and that's the first time anyone more senior than me has gone to any project that we've ever done, right? Normally we are totally ignored because we are remote. Because this one was only 4 hours away and they were going up to Shepparton anyway, they sort of passed by, and they were like, Nicola was like, we need more of this, can you do more? And it's like, no, I mean, this community is at its wit's end anyway. I wouldn't even suggest, people from engineering are like, well, can you share? And I'm just like, they can't cope with any more. They can barely cope with us. So, it's tough like that. It's not easy to upscale. And it's really, really relationship driven too. So you can't spread too thin, because then you'll start getting things wrong.
Introduce a bunch of engineers.
It feels like linear distance is so difficult to overcome. It's it's a form of flying out regardless, even if it's a sort of visits to the same place. Yeah.
I think on the flip side of that though, and I agree, it's difficult and time consuming and expensive and all that kind of stuff, though, the fact that we do go back and we do put the effort in, that counts a lot. You know, they know who we are and they are happy to see us turn up. So there, you know, it does have that advantage. If it was right next door and you went as frequently as we do, they'd just go, that's a bit slack. But the fact that it is, you know, they do understand the commitment.
But, you know, you mentioned concern for the next generation as well. There seems to be something that you're beginning to observe.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not new news. Like there's a lot of people who are concerned about the loss of Indigenous knowledge and the fact that new generations coming on don't really seem, well, not all, you know, not all of them, but a lot of people don't know who they're interested in engaging. And anyone that's really, really top notch in these communities gets stolen out of the communities as well. I mean, Melbourne Uni is desperate for people with Indigenous people with skills, and they're happy to steal it from anywhere else. So they don't really care about what hole they leave somewhere else. They're desperate to like have the, you know, have the box ticked here. And I think that sort of flows on, you know, various levels right down to communities that they do get sucked dry.
The woman in your video looked quite young.
Like,
Quite young.
yeah, the Helmer one.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was, and she is still there. She's part of the Rangers team now, and she's a future leader. Yeah. But the fact that she was out on country with us back in 2014 is a good sign of, you know, who's people are engaged at that young age.
Yeah, I was just wondering, you talked a lot about the buildings and what happens on site and stuff, but there's also, you built up this immaterial structure, which is the relationship that the Bauer Studios and yourself have with all of these communities. I saw in the naming that you've been back to many times. So it seems to me that's probably, that whole bundle of relationships is probably the most valuable thing in so far as long as that continues to exist, things will continue to happen. Do you have any thoughts or philosophy about that network of relationships and how it can, whatever,
Sustain.
even, well, sustain is obviously the first thing, but yeah, growth, replicate.
Okay, so one of the ways that I try and build capacity is within the university as well.
Yeah.
And it's hard because no one puts the funding into this, right? So I feel like I'm pushing string here. But I've got my staff, with only a couple of exceptions, are my previous students. So I try each time to have one or two students that's been involved in a community come back as like the student mentors for the next group of students that come through. The community love it because they love seeing students coming back again as well. The new students appreciate it because there's some expertise and they feel a bit safer having, you know, expert students with them as well. The students that come back are often students that have done a design that's quite appropriate for the next thing that we build. So we're incorporating a whole lot of their design ideas into it as well. So I'm trying to build that kind of capacity. And there's some great people, like the people that take on these roles, brilliant, and way smarter than me. It's fantastic having them along.
Right.
But the university doesn't support that.
Yeah.
But there is, but there's a limited number of communities out there, so it's hard to work out how they could take on their own role in another community and have like another offshoot of our, because a lot of these communities are they're in difficult places.
And students, how do they, like, what is the impact of this on the students? What is the kind of feedback you get?
Yeah, so of course you get students saying this is the most interesting thing I've ever done at uni, and that's good. So it should be in some way. Yeah. Like, you know, that okay, I'm going to go into like the problematic parts of it again, because the problems are good to address. Whatever. The students that I had last time, I don't give the students a brief. So when they're when they're in the community, they have to speak to community members. They have to find their own site. They have to work out what it is that they're going to be doing. they don't, because of we've got to make sure that they've got all of the research done beforehand, teach them how to build, take them to community, do the build there. They're not getting a brief until like week 7, week 8, week 9 sort of thing. And then they're working it out themselves. Some students struggle with that because their peers in other groups are getting a brief right from the go. And I saw one of the students came the other day that I had and said, look at what we've got this time. And in week 2 or something, they've got all of these A4 sheets with, I want this drawing and this drawing, like little rectangles drawn with like a little sketch of what the student needs to do in each of these books. And the student said, oh my God, this is just like a whole new thing, you know, having it so described.
From the community?
No,
Oh,
this is
no,
from
sorry,
another design studio.
Yeah.
They're being told exactly what to do. And so, you know, I look at that and some of the students that are struggling, you know, trying to work out themselves what they need to do. And I'm wondering, what do I need to do in order to, you know, stop having a bunch of students feeling like they're being marginalised when it comes to the moderation of the marks they get. You know, I don't want it out there. It's impossible to get a good mark in Bauer, right? That's not, and it shouldn't be, given the amount of time of the students and the effort they put into it. And I know time and effort doesn't make you a great designer or whatever, but I am scared that that maybe it's the other studios that need to change, not me. Maybe we need to meet in the middle, but there seems to be some other studios where it is very, very prescriptive on what to do. And you know, AI is coming in, and could AI get a really good mark in some of these other studios? Because they're not going to do well in my studio. AI is not going to help.
Partly because this is an architecture studio, and you know, architecture is generally framed in a particular way, which focuses on the forms of buildings. And you're doing something that's much more multidisciplinary.
Yeah, and so at the moment it fits in this studio as a 25 point. So there's a 12.5 and a 25 point. So a big subject and a small subject for this. The big subject at the moment fitted across the C studios and the E studios. That's hard, and it's hard to meet the criteria that need to be assessed in those areas. And other times I run it as a subject that's separate from the design studios. It still gets design studio credit points, but it sits enough outside of it for it to be able to work more in the way that you're talking about. It's not just being the typical design studio, and actually cope with the different complexities and the different weightings that we put on the assessment.
In our undergrad curriculum, I'm talking about this vertical studio we do. So we did a build project, but it's taken 5 years to build because we do like an intensive week where in the first week of every second semester, you do a project that's not in curriculum based. So you can pick any project and do that with the students. And so we execute it bit by bit by bit, you know, per week. So it doesn't have to fit into a specific studio or something like that.
It's hard working out because the university wants it to be linear.
Yes.
And the reality is, as I've tried to make the case, it's not like that at all.
Yeah.
And trying to be able to squeeze a type of learning into what the university is requiring is hard.
But isn't that also because we become more prescriptive? Like over the now 20 years that I've been here, it's just become more and more prescriptive. Every subject, every kind of offering.
Because we're more student demand of the student is that they want prescription, right? And we're so assessment led now that this is what is created. I think
It's just
problematic.
We're preparing them for the real world. Just like
Departmental meetings.
Yeah, well, in the real world, no client issue a written out briefing, how many square meters they want, how many drawings they want. Yeah, that's what I argue, but it's doesn't necessarily mesh easily with the student expectations and with the university.
I'm sorry to break up the natural flow of the conversation. We've got a question on the chat that I'll read out for everyone. from, sorry if I pronounce your name wrong, Boonanan. Congratulations, David. Greetings from Bangkok. This is Pan, who took part of the very first Bauer studio.
Yes.
What I've found the best of these amazing works is not just about academic contribution, but real life experiences, both of students and local communities involved. Incremental architecture starts when local aspirations emerge. Thank you. Sorry, there was no question there.
That's all right.
I didn't read it in advance. Sorry, I should have. Yeah, sorry, that was a comment.
So Pan did a great master's thesis here where he was looking at the incremental developments that were happening in the Thai mass-produced row houses and how people adapted them to suit their economic and aspirational needs. And it's work that I still do, Pan, by looking at.
He's up there now.
Hi, hi. It's work that I still are really interested in with the housing done by elemental architects in Chile. When looking at that, and also the reconstruction houses that were done after the tsunami in Aarnja. So yeah, I'm still really interested. So thank you, Pan, for helping me learn as well back in the day.
Probably should wrap this up.
Yeah.
But can I say some of us might go over and have a beer at the Clyde if you want to join us. Those of you online.
Come on down.
Thank you, David. Actually hosting our Progressive Planners Network gathering at the Clyde as well. So I'll see some familiar faces there. Others.